Did you know that less than 1% of the world's population will run a marathon in their lifetime? That stat itself exemplifies just how much of an achievement it is to run a marathon. In this video, I thought I'd share with you some of the lessons that I picked up along my marathon journey in the hope that if you choose to take on a marathon challenge yourself, it might make your experience a little easier. Right guys, welcome back to another video. Apologies for my long YouTube sabbatical, but we're back now. Expect more content coming thick and fast.
That's what she said.
Right, so to do this video justice, I've enlisted the help of my marathon training partner, Harry Shepherd of HS Fitness fame.
Oh, friend.
Yes. So obviously we ran the marathon together and did all our training together. So it's fitting that we cover this because we went through different challenges individually.
Coming in at number one then, we have a training plan and the fact that you need to follow it. To be honest, this is pretty self-explanatory. If you think you can just wing a marathon on its own, then you're rid of a hat. So this comes from the old adage that what's measured can be improved. You basically need a 16-week structured training plan normally is the going rate, isn't it?
Yeah, 16 to 20 weeks. It depends how much of a beginner you are at the start of that. We were a little bit more advanced, so we pretty much did 12, didn't we?
Yeah, effectively. Key piece of advice here is I wouldn't follow a generic training plan provided either by the charity that you're running for or by the marathon itself because they tend to be a bit vague. What I would do is either structure one yourself or if you don't have the expertise, seek out the help of someone that knows what they're doing. So it works around not only your lifestyle, so there's more chance that you'll stick to it, but also your capabilities, so you're not A, biting off more than you can chew, or B, it's not challenging enough for you and you're not pushing yourself as hard as you could.
And throughout our marathon training, we stuck to our weight training. So a lot of these programs that you find are cookie cutter will just provide running, so they might provide 4 or 5 runs a week. We couldn't have really stuck to that with our weight training involved as well. So we stuck to a 3 run a week plan, but still managed to get the same amount of weekly mileage in, which is the main point. Obviously, these plans are there to build you up in terms of weekly mileage, 10% on every single week. We had that, but we had to spread it over 3 runs rather than 4. So the middle run and the long run were just a little bit longer.
Yeah, and the good thing about a training plan as well is if you don't have a running partner, the training plan will at least provide a bit of accountability for you.
So what it also does is just provide you something to tick off each and every week. I know if I'm not following something, I'll just think, okay, I've got to run at some point this week. I'm much less likely to do that and certainly to do the distance I'm required to do than if it's put in front of me and I've got something to actually tick off each and every day.
Coming in at number 2 then, we have fueling and hydration. So be prepared for us to throw some science at you now because it's going to get a bit anal.
Only basic science. Don't be too
Yeah.
We can't do science ourselves.
So we'll start off with hydration then. I think probably the most underrated aspect of marathon training because people basically look past it.
Yeah, and it's pertinent throughout the entire process. It's not just pertinent on race day or on your longer runs. All throughout the process when you think about hydration and electrolytes. So when people think about hydration, often they just think about water.
Yeah.
And just think about getting 2 to 3 litres of water in a day. That's great. However, if you are excess sweating, such as you will be for running 90 minutes, 2 hours, 2.5 hours, then you're going to be losing things called electrolytes, which is made up of mainly sodium and potassium. If you're not replenishing them, then you are going to end up dehydrated and that's going to affect your performance in a negative way. If you just replenish with water, you're going to end up flushing through even more of those electrolytes, leaving you further dehydrated.
Yeah, and as we said, a lot of people overlook hydration, but in terms of actual effort on your part, it's pretty low-hanging fruit. So if you can square that away, you're actually putting yourself at a massive advantage compared to most people.
Exactly, and you've got to think of this in an individual sense. So we had never had this measured, but anecdotally, we definitely sweat different levels of sodium. So if you're someone who knows that they cramp a little bit more during a longer run, so me, then you're going to want more sodium, you're going to want more electrolytes, both before the race and during the race. If you're someone who knows you don't really cramp as much, you might need a little bit less. So this is something you need to trial and error, and you need to just treat as an individual thing. Don't just have the same as your pal.
Yeah, so there is a good photo of Shep after the marathon, cramping up. And as I said, at no point during training did I ever cramp up somehow. I don't know why that is. Don't know the science behind that, but I'm effectively a camel as far as I can tell. So moving on slightly from hydration, but staying on the same theme, we then have fueling and the infamous carb load, which isn't pleasant, but again is an essential and is pretty low-hanging fruit. So you want to make sure you nail that before the race day.
Yeah, it's pretty necessary. It's necessary evil. So you want to make sure again that this is practiced before race week. So you don't want to just rock up to race week and think, shit, I need to carb load. How do I do that? You want to have prepared that. So during your training plan, you'll have longer runs. You'll have runs that are like 18, 20 miles, that kind of thing. On those runs, it's important to practice this carb load. So have all the foods that you're going to have on race week, have the same amount of food, have the same amount of carbohydrates, and make sure you note down what you're actually having individually so that you can replicate that when you get to race week. The worst thing you can do is to just introduce new foods and introduce a new method of carb loading on race week, 'cause you never know how your body's going to react. That's something we did pretty well in it.
Yeah, we did it pretty well. So like my metabolism is a lot slower than Shep's, so I would have to eat about half an hour to an hour before you ate on a race morning for me to digest my food. Otherwise I'd just end up with stitch, wouldn't I?
Yeah, but I have to pretty much keep grazing all the way until the race.
Yeah, so in terms of carb loading itself, like the day before, ideally when you're at your peak, you want to be kind of getting 5 to 6 grams of carbs per kilogram of body weight, which if you do the math is a shitload of pasta. So another tip I would make sure that you do is meal prep all of your food, because otherwise you will literally just live at the kitchen stove for the entire day.
Yeah, pasta takes 10 minutes to cook, but if you're having like 6 bowls a day, it adds up. The other thing is intra-race fueling then. So in the middle of the race, how much do you have? We had a plan going in that we'd trialled in training and had worked pretty well. However, we'd only ever ran for about 2.5 hours, and our race would turn out to be 3.5. So we were doing a gel, so a certain amount of carbs, 40 grams in our case, every 5 miles. So for me, that was about every 45, 50 minutes. That turned out actually not to be enough for me. So in terms of what I've learned since then, obviously you learn from your mistakes, so learn from ours. You're supposed to have 60 to 100 grams of carbs every hour when you're working out, certainly if you're working out for an extended period of time. So I was having 40 grams every hour, so that left me obviously pretty short. So 3 hours into that marathon, I started to bonk and my energy started to come down.
Right, so in terms of actual energy gels that we recommend, it's time for some shameless product placement. I have an entire box of Science in Sport Beta Fuel, which is what we use for the actual race. So these have 40 grams of carbohydrates per tube, which is about 20 grams more than the other kind of high street standard gels. So if you think about it, what Shep was saying, the amount that you need per hour, if you just carrying a few of these around with you, you're going to need a lot less than if you buy the gels that have only got 20 grams of carbs in them.
Yeah, you're going to need to take at least 3 of those high street gels on per hour, whereas that you'd get away with 1.5 to 2 of those per hour, which is obviously a lot less to carry around with you.
I was going to say, if you think purely in practical terms, you've already carrying your phone around with you anyway, and potentially keys and other essential items. You don't also want to be filling out your pouch with a shitload of gels. And then also some electrolyte plug-in. These are Element electrolyte, well, what are they, sachets? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so these are good on the move, because a lot of electrolyte formulas that you get come in kind of pre-workout tubs, which are big and bulky. These are ideal for on the move, so you can actually carry them directly to the start line with you. Yeah, so the good thing about Element electrolytes is that they have 1,000 milligrams of sodium per serving, compared to about, what is it,
250 normally.
Yeah, so normally like the little shit tablets you get on Amazon have about 250 milligrams per serving.
So if you contextualise that a little bit, what you need to be taking on before and during the race, so before the race you want to be taking on between 1 and 2 grams, so 1,000 milligrams to 2,000 milligrams of sodium. So if you're having those little tablets, you're going to need like 4 to 8 of those, versus just 1 to 2 of these. So it obviously makes a massive difference. Again, just linking back to practicality, obviously you don't have to carry around as much stuff.
Coming at number 3 then, we have developing a race routine, and this is something that we definitely benefited from. So at some point during your training, you're going to be building up to distances like half marathon distance. At this point, instead of just doing that on your own around the roads near where you live, which is what most people do with their training, I would actually book yourself onto an organised event, so you expose yourself to the feeling of race day, and it gives you a chance to actually develop your race routine that you're going to use on the marathon day itself.
Yeah, so a lot of people are beginner runners here, so they haven't done a marathon, but they certainly haven't done any other races like a 5 or a 10k or a half marathon, so it's a good idea to get at least one of those under your belt before you go and do the marathon, because like you say, you can practice all of those routines that you need to go from the morning to a few days before, to get into the race, to actually lining up before the start line, feeling the butterflies in your stomach before you go. There's a lot of things that happen on a race day that don't actually happen on a just training run. So the nerves are different, the feeling's different, the scheduling is different, so the food you have to eat a little bit on a different time scale, all of those sort of things that if you haven't done them before are going to catch you out on race day. So making sure you've practiced them and you have a little bit of a routine in place before you go is really a good idea.
Yeah, and just adding on from that, something almost certainly is likely to go wrong. On race day, it certainly went a bit tits up for us. So if you've got experience of that happening before the actual marathon itself, it's going to put you in good stead. Oh yeah, and just touching on from this as well, the actual race itself is very different to when you're just running on your own. When you're running and you've got a crowd, it's very easy to get carried away and throw pacing out the window effectively.
Yeah. It's very easy to throw the kitchen sink at it, basically. So when you're in your first race and you've got that adrenaline going, you haven't been in that situation before, very easy to forget your pacing and just go off the gate like 7-minute miles, whatever it is, faster than you've planned. Obviously in a 5 or a 10k, not too much of a problem. In a marathon over 42 kilometres, a little bit more of an issue. So if you're thinking about practicing your pacing, it's a good idea to do that obviously in your training runs, but it's a really good idea to do that in a race environment beforehand, because you can get used to pacing yourself with an actual crowd around you and with people cheering you on.
Yeah, this is basically an exercise in chimp management.
For anyone who's read Steve Peters' book, you know what that reference means.
Right, number 4 then, decent kit and the fact that you need to invest in some decent equipment. So this comes from the truism of life that man is only as good as his tools. So we both bought new kit and invested in new footwear during our marathon journey, and it's fair to say it paid dividends.
Yeah, so you think about how much you're going to be using this stuff and what a difference it's going to make in terms of making your life a lot easier. So having good running shoes, you're going to be spending hours and hours in those running shoes, pounding the pavement. It's a good idea to have them, a decent cushion and at least a comfy shoe. Having a decent watch, GPS watch, and having a heart rate monitor, again, just going to give you some data to go off and to make sure you can track your runs and you make sure you can progress at a decent rate. If you don't have all of these things at your disposal, you're going to spend hours essentially in the dark, not knowing how fast you're going, how far you're going, and you can spend hours uncomfortably smashing your shins against the pavement in shit shoes.
Yeah, so touching on the shoes, I started training in some like 4-year-old New Balances, picked up a load of foot injuries, and then about 4 weeks out from race day itself, I changed to some Hoka Clifton 9s, and then miraculously all my foot issues cleared up. So make of that what you will. And then secondly, in terms of GPS watches, like Shep was saying, a lot of people just run off rate of perceived exertion, so you're basically just guessing how fucked you are. That doesn't really cut it when it comes to marathon training. So you want to get a Garmin, so you effectively have a science lab on your wrist. Then you can accurately measure all of your runs and know where you're actually at, instead of just basically plucking figures out of the air.
Yeah, and exactly like we were saying before with the race day, adrenaline and nerves, you're obviously going to feel at that first hour a little bit better than maybe you are physiologically feeling. So the data on your watch or on your heart rate monitor is going to tell you that you've gone a little bit too fast. And this actually happened to you, didn't it?
Yeah. So, on the London Marathon, well, we'll get into the fact that I didn't sleep on the next point, but basically I was sleep deprived and my heart rate monitor had me at zone 5 in the first 10k because I was so hanging out. So I took the executive decision to slow down, and it probably saved my marathon, didn't it? Really?
Yeah, it paid dividends. And if you hadn't had that data available to you, you would have just kept on feeling good, and then at like 20k you would have just gone boom, and you'd have been fucked. So it really, really can save races.
Going into point 5 then, we just touched on the fact that my race nearly went very south. This is enjoy the day itself. A lot of people, especially first time runners, get caught up in arbitrary records and times. If this is your first marathon, just concentrate on soaking up the atmosphere, especially for a race like London, because it's probably the best marathon atmosphere in the world.
Yeah,
we're not just saying that because we ran it. Like, we've spoken to experienced runners and they say the same. But also, secondly, if it's your first marathon, just getting over the finish line itself is an achievement.
Yeah, so don't get too caught up in the times you need to hit or the paces you need to hold, whatever, because what can quickly happen is you can forget where you are and forget how much of a unique experience you're involved in that sort of 3 or 4 hour period of your life. So if you're zone 5 absolutely hanging out, the ability to take in your surroundings is very, very minimal. Whereas if you can manage it back a little bit and actually be at sort of zone 3 or 4 and be cognizant of what's happening around you, then you can actually appreciate the day for what it is and not get to the finish line having just blacked out for the last 10k.
Yeah, so like we were saying, I got very little sleep the day before the run because I was too nervous. So again, this is another reason to get your pre-race routine nailed before the actual day itself, so you don't fall foul or something like this. But about 10k into the run, I was heart rate zone 5, which, if you know anything about running, isn't sustainable over a marathon distance. So I took the executive decision to slow down, and I thought, how many times in my life am I actually going to run the London Marathon? Probably not a lot. It's probably best if I have fond memories of this running it slightly slower than if I try and keep up a heart rate zone 5 pace and end up in the back of an ambulance. Oh yeah, and then touching on from this point as well, but slightly different, is after the race, if you've just run a marathon, please celebrate it, especially if you're an amateur runner, because we sent it, didn't we, after the London Marathon, and we were a bit miffed as to why no one else seems to be in.
There was no one else out in London after like 40,000 runners had just ran the London Marathon. I don't know where they'd gone, but they didn't go out.
That just seemed a bit weird to us, because you put all this graft into this one day. Why not then celebrate it?
Yeah, you've got to celebrate it. And like, if your mates are like trying to push you to go out, and you're like, oh no, got to hydrate, I've got to get my carbs back in, right? No, you don't, because you haven't got to run a marathon the next day or the next week, right?
Yeah.
All you've got to do is sleep for the next 3 weeks. So just take that opportunity to enjoy it. Okay, take a little bit of the leaf out of the Royal Marines book and celebrate with alcohol.
Ooh, you're hard showing off.
So there we have it. There are our top 5 tips for preparing for your first marathon. I hope you got some little golden nuggets there that you can use if you're planning to take on a marathon challenge. All the usual gubbins. Remember to comment, like and subscribe if you haven't been completely repulsed by what you've seen. Yeah, so stay tuned guys, and we'll try and upload every week. See you soon.